Hi everyone, this is Rod Kate. Welcome to episode 5 of Rocket Motivation. My guest today is someone who went to my same high school. He was 4 years behind me, so we were not there at the same time. But we're both from Stokes County, North Carolina. We've both dealt with adversity, but of different types. My childhood and upbringing and today's guest could not have been more different. Today's guest's father was one of the biggest drug dealers in Stokes County. He spent the majority of today's guest's childhood and adolescent years in and out of prison. Growing up in such a tough environment did not stop today's guest from achieving success academically, professionally, and with his family. Actually, what today's guest went through shaped what he wanted to do with his life. Derrick Dalton, welcome to Rocket Motivation.
Hey Rod, how you doing, man?
Doing really good, and thanks so much for coming on the show today. Derrick, before we get into your story, please tell our listeners who you are today. What is your career and what does your daily life look like?
I'm a dad. First and foremost, every morning when I wake up, I have to take care of my boys. I have 4 here at the house. I have an older son who's a wonderful dad, and I'm a granddad, and then I'm a husband as well of 21 years. And then I'm a drive coach. I work for the Drive Revolution, and as a drive coach, we have the opportunity to go to different schools. In most situations, we're going into schools that are low performing, maybe high discipline. Attendance rate is very low. And as a drive coach, me and the team consisting of Charlie Lyons and Jane Williams and Gideon Goff and other drive coaches, we would go in and support those schools in building their culture and building their climate in order to be more successful academically. But we're really focusing on those low performing schools and either other schools, and they could be high performing, but they may not have a very good culture. But we would go into those schools and we would support them in creating stronger relationships with the principal and the staff, the leadership team and the staff, and then from leadership team, staff to the students. We would go in to mesh those relationships, utilizing the science of William Glasser as he discusses basic needs, and then also the science of Dr. Powers, who discusses the perceptual control theory, or the reason why humans behave the way that they do. So we go in and we really dig in on that science to make those schools more productive and engaging. That leads to this academic success.
Now, your life today is nothing like it was growing up. Tell us about your childhood and family life that was a little bit different than most other people growing up.
I come from the part of Walnut Cove is called London. And man, just to give a quick shout out to my little corner of Walnut Cove there. It was a great community growing up. It was something you may see off of television from the 70s. It was kids everywhere, bicycles everywhere, pickup games everywhere. And, we had a wonderful community stuck back there in what we call London. That was a plus for me growing up. So it's not all doom and gloom what you're about to hear, but our neighborhood was pretty awesome. Yet about first, second grade, I started to see some things that were a little bit different. My dad was he was a really good person. We grew up in that little small, little 3-bedroom, 1-bath home in London. And I just, at an early age, I noticed we just had a lot of visitors, man. And, that was the big thing for me. It was a lot of characters coming through, a lot of people coming around to hang out, always plenty of alcohol flowing, that was, to kick off the social aspect. And my dad was a huge social guy. And then, there were always knocks at the door late at night. For me, just the only house I'd ever been in. So I thought it was fairly normal for a lot of people to come by and visit, a lot of people to come knocking on your door late at night. And the significance of that is my bedroom door was by the back door. And that was probably, that was where everyone came. You live out in the country a little bit, folks tend to knock on the back door, not the front. So around second grade, people would knock all times of night. And then I'd go get my dad. My dad would come out. They would have a quick conversation. He'd make another trip to the room. He'd come back, and then everyone would be off on their way. And, my door was just right there. I'd be watching television or just chilling out in my room and just constant. So I thought this was fairly normal. So I said, maybe everyone has late night knocks. And maybe everyone has a lot of folks over to drink and hang out. So, that was my normal. And, it's what we call reference. My reference was that people come by and knock on your door at any time of night.
did you know, you're in the second grade then, I mean, did you know what was going on? I mean, other than, that was your normal people coming over, having some fun at your house, coming over all times of night. But I mean, did you have any idea what was happening?
Not really. Like I said, I just thought it was normal. And I just thought everyone had that type of visit, late night, whatever the case may be. But, you kind of figure, you see strange reactions at times. You see a little bit of paranoia, maybe. You don't know what it is in first or second grade. And then in third grade is when I finally realized, all right, this was probably not the best thing that could have happened. And in third grade, one Friday evening, we had a normal flow of household guests. And, basically it was another Friday night, Saturday night party. And this particular Friday night, the house is packed with 15, 20 deep. The alcohol's flowing. People are having a good time. The music's playing. And I kind of weave my way through the crowd of party folks at my house. And, no big deal. And I get to the sink and I'm getting something to drink, some water or something. And I look down, I see the police running down the street with shotguns. And, at that point in time, I just turned to my dad and said, "Hey, Dad, the police just ran down the street." And he looked at me and like, "Are you sure?" And by that time, it was almost like a total collapse of the household. And I'm in third grade at this point. So at that point, I realized, hey, you know what? This probably wasn't a very normal situation. So the police came in and they raided our house. They took individuals to jail and we had an overabundance of alcohol. And then I just remember my dad continuously telling jokes during this whole process. And, people are in handcuffs and he's still kind of shucking and jiving and being a comedian or having a great sense of humor during this whole thing. And then they went and actually, if I remember correctly, they went and got a second search warrant. Warrant allowed them to look in his car. And so that was the one that did him in, because the felony arrest came with the distribution of that bag of marijuana, because he had also sold to an undercover person. So that was the kind of the eye opener there. By the time I went to fourth grade, he was gone for 2 or 3 years, and that was his first offense. And so for 2 or 3 years, growing up after that particular situation, we just spent every Sunday going to a different prison camp somewhere in North Carolina. And that was pretty much our routine. And we would get up, we'd head out 311 in Winston. We would stop at Bojangles, grab a biscuit, and then we would head to a different prison camp. If he moved, we moved too. So every Sunday was a travel day.
Okay. And how long did that last?
I kind of remember maybe toward the end of sixth grade when he finally came home. So he may have been gone for 2 or 3 years on that first offense.
And so what's going on in your life from this time? I mean, he's gone, you're in school, up through the sixth grade. How was your life changed at this point? I mean, I know you're going on every Sunday to go visit your father in prison, but I mean, what else is going on with your life?
I'm continuing to grow, and become a pretty good athlete at the time. Baseball was my best sport, but, I had that passion for basketball. And, the entire time, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you're starting to head toward puberty. You have these things going on, but you don't have a dad there. So, I would see him once a week, maybe talk to him once a week on the phone. But, basically I'm trying to fit in because, my household was pretty different from most kids, I would think. Once again, I realized finally that wasn't a normal setting. So I'm trying to fit in as a regular 4th, 5th, 6th grader. So I go to school every day and I try to be like the other kids, but really and truly, I've seen some things that most kids will never see in their life and things they may only see on television. So I'm trying to make it. And, I end up having some really great support from a particular teacher and during that particular time, because they changed my classes. And, I always thought this was ironic that, I was about the time my dad was charged, I was tested, and then I was placed in the academically gifted class on the other side of school. And that was a change that I just didn't want any parts of, because they removed me from my comfort zone, which was with my buddies in our neighborhood and my loyal friends. And then they moved me to the other side of the school with kids who I really didn't know.
Not only is your dad has been in prison, now they've taken you out of your comfort zone with your buddies in school, although it is a good thing that you tested into the gifted program. But so now you've got your life, you got the upheaval once, now you got upheaval twice. And so the seventh, eighth, and ninth grade years, that's your Southeastern junior high years. You become a pretty good athlete during that time. I mean, that now you're developing. There's something special going on there with you. Tell us about the support you got from your coaches and other teachers at Southeastern to help you develop during your junior high years.
Well, that was the time where you're starting to really develop mentally. You're starting to develop at least a direction when it comes to what you want to do in your life. So those were very formative years, and the sports kept me in line because, I wasn't the greatest student as far as effort is concerned. But I did a pretty good job academically, but, as far as the athletics and that was my motivator. That was my true motivator to get up every morning, come to school and do well, because I couldn't wait till after school to play football, to play basketball, play baseball. So, when I get to Southeastern, it was almost like a handoff because I had some ability, I had some potential. That's where I end up with Mr. Hemmings. He was my social studies teacher for 3 years. He's retired now. I had Jane Williams. She was one of my teachers. Her husband, Mr. Rick Williams, he was my football coach. I had Bobby Duncan, and, he passed, and, he was our basketball coach. And Ronnie Mendenhall was our guidance counselor. But I had this little village, and then I had some other teachers as well. But that crew right there, they all coached me, or they all, at some point, actually put their hands on me to say, you can do better, or do you need some help? It was pretty intentional because around 8th grade, my dad got locked up again. And I'm not sure what the details were, but at some point he ended up going back to prison. The principal, Mr. Harrison, and the guidance counselor, Mr. Mendenhall, they knew I needed a little extra support. And, so I always had those individuals that I mentioned, during my junior high years, who just kept an eye on me. They kept a foot on me. They kicked me in my butt when I needed it, just so I stayed moving in the right direction.
I mean, and did you have some instances when you did kind of act out when you needed your butt kicked?
Yeah, quite often. We had a tough little neighborhood there, so we didn't mind cussing and fighting. It was just part of growing up in London. And, we would get it in some days, and some days that carried over onto the field, and some days that carried over onto the court. I needed some redirecting quite often, and they didn't hesitate to give it to me because it was out of love. It was out of love. It was tough love at times, but it was something I needed to hear because I wasn't going to hear it at home. Mom's at work, dad was locked up.
All right, so Derrick, I know the sports, everything was going great at South. You had a great football career, basketball, but it sounds like I think baseball turned out to be your number one sport. Is that right?
Yes, and that was by default. Dad gets out in the 10th grade, and I'm still trying to fit in. And even in the junior high days and the high school days, it's always like I didn't really want to reveal how much time I'd spent at a prison camp, that my dad was a felon, because I wanted to fit in. And that I used my athletics, I used sports to kind of fit in and, to kind of take away from those inadequacies, I guess you would call it, that I carried, that luggage that I carried with me.
I guess, did your friends know that your dad was in jail for dealing drugs?
The guys who were really tight with me knew, and the guys who lived in that London area, I guess I would skirt the issue, or I was able to avoid it just by being a pretty good athlete. I think people knew, but you weren't going to get it from me in case we were super, super tight. And I didn't have many friends like that.
Understandably, that's not something you just want to go talk with about with everybody. How did that play into kind of your development in high school?
I wanted to do better than what I had seen. I had become very comfortable as a kid visiting a prison camp. I was in the prison camp so many times from, back in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, even 8th, 9th grade, part of 10th grade. When we would go into prison camps, it became rather comfortable at one point. And I had to catch myself and say, this is not what you want to do. This is not where you want to be. So I internalized a lot of things, a little bit of frustration with my dad because he wasn't there all the time. And then I run into these situations, whether it was dealing with girls or dealing with coaches or whatever the case may be, really had nowhere to go. I had to figure things out on my own, how to change a tire, how to work on your car, things that we take for granted, but, he wasn't there. So, when I got to high school, things became very, very complicated. And there were times when I was just probably a little bit too much and I lost my way, doing things that I shouldn't have been doing. I mean, I was a typical high school kid to a certain extent. That drive and that internal focus was, it came with a price, because, I was willing to sacrifice everything if I could be better at my sport, if I could overlook everything, all my luggage, and then highlight my sports. I could use that, just to help me soothe a little bit. So I was a determined individual when I got on the field. And like I said, I played with anger at times because I just did not like losing.
Now, baseball though was your ticket to college. Tell us about your when you go off to college.
I finished up at South. I had a pretty good senior year, so I head off to Elon for my first year of school. And one of the things that stood out about me is mom was getting me prepped to go, dad was getting me prepped to go, and he asked me, is anything that I needed? And I told him I wanted a $100 A1000 Wilson glove to go to college, because I'd never had a new baseball glove ever in my life. I would find a baseball glove a couple of days before practice, which was the day after basketball ended. I would just find a glove and go out and play. And, so I made 2 years of all conference, 11th, 12th grade. And so my dad was able to come up with $100, and he bought me a $100 glove to go to Elon to play college baseball. And, not having a clear plan, because, I didn't have anyone to help me develop that clear plan. But my goal was to head to Elon for a couple of years and then go pro. And that was my goal. It was nothing to do with a degree. I know Elon turned out 2 or 3 draft picks every other year. And I said, well, if I get there and I can play a little bit, I can get a little stronger, I can learn a little more baseball. Instead of focusing on 3 sports, I can really lock it down. And then in my junior year, I'll be drafted. I mean, that was my plan. But unfortunately, heading in, I actually had a labral tear the summer before arriving at Elon. It was fine during school ball, but I tore the labrum during the summer, and I never had it repaired. I thought it would heal up on its own. It never did heal up. So I ended up going to Elon. And of course, you can't compete with a nationally ranked team if you're not 100%. And I couldn't throw. My throwing was probably at 70% of what it was, maybe even 60%. And so that kind of put me on the shelf. I mean, the coach was Rick Jones, he was the U.S. coach of the USA national team. He's retired now after coaching at Tulane. He told me, I'm not going to cut you. And I was like, cut me? I was like, you were thinking about cutting me? And he looked at me and was like, yeah. He said, you need to get that shoulder together. And man, that was a punch in the gut, because I knew I couldn't compete on the same level that I was once competing. And I also knew that, that chance of going to MLB was pretty much gone, because I was not a 5'2" player.
Tell us about how your Elon career ends up.
Well, I finished up that freshman year. I got redshirted. I went from a 205 bench to a 250 bench. So I'm thinking I'm good now, because that was my rehab for my shoulder, without any surgery. And then I went out to throw, and I still couldn't throw. So I was totally, I went in the dumps for a while. I had a surgery over the summer, and so they removed scar tissue, and I said, all right, I'm good now. So I stayed around 240, 250 bench, said I should be good. And I get back to Elon and go out on the baseball field, and I still can't throw. So I'm tanked now. I'm in the tank, and I'm really at a state of depression. My dad's at home. I'm stopping by when I go home, and normally, 50% chance when I get there, there's no power. He's trying to make it, but I'm down at Elon now, and now I'm trying to make it too. I'm trying to figure this thing out, but I'm kind of like, I don't have very much direction, especially when the shoulder's gone, because my plan was gone. My plan was out of whack as far as going pro in baseball. I was in a bad way. And so I went back to Elon, and I'm sitting in my dorm room in January of my sophomore year. I made it through the first semester somehow. I wasn't doing very good academically either, because that wasn't part of the plan. January of 90, I'm sitting home watching television with my roommate, Daryl, and then my house comes up on the news, and it's my dad. And my dad's found himself in another drug-related situation, and there's a drug raid on my house. And the entire news is it's like 5 minutes worth of news on this huge drug raid in Walnut Cove, North Carolina. You're sitting in your dorm room, and all of a sudden you're watching TV, and all of a sudden your house is on the TV, and it's your dad is getting busted for drugs. They had full coverage on the news. In the last couple of years, there had been no drug activity at all. And me and my dad had talked about that. To see him with the drug bust, I'm like, that's not right. Because, we've already had this discussion. He said he wasn't hustling anymore. And that's the word he used. He's like, he's not a hustler. And then I got on the phone, like I said, this was before cell phones. So I started making calls. And it was like, yeah, that's your dad. He really messed up this time. That was from a couple of different people. I'm like, well, what happened? We don't know what happened, but it's not good. It's bad. And at that point, I threw everything I could fit in my little Toyota. I threw it in my car and I left Elon, never to return. I went home. I didn't withdraw. I didn't go to the registrar's office. I just left. And, it was an empty feeling because my plan A hadn't worked and I didn't have a plan B. And then to know one of those phone calls was basically, he's going to go away for a long time. And I left Elon. I came, pretty much straight to the house and said, hey, Dad, I'm here. It's me and you right now. We'll figure this thing out. And then he would go to court to Danbury every month. And for almost, 6 or 7 months, he would come home. So after 2 months, he came home and he told me, he said, hey, I have an option here. He said, I can tell on somebody. In other words, I'm looking at a lot of time. And I said, what are you waiting on? He said, well, if I tell on somebody, they want me to bring down a pretty big guy. And he said, if I tell on someone, we're going to have to watch our backs for the rest of our lives. I said, we can handle it. We got that. I'm talking tough right now because I don't want him to go away because we know he's looking at a lot of time. And he just kind of looked at me and he shook his head like, can't do it. He said, I can't put you and your sister in danger. He said, it'll be okay. And so around September, I'm working at Duke Power now. I'm paying the bills. I'm working at Duke Power. I got on steel toe boots, hard hat, and I'm working, 10-hour shifts going down to Spencer, North Carolina. And, that became my job just to keep the house up or whatnot. And, about September, he goes, he doesn't come back. And so he gets 77 years on a cocaine charge.
All right. What's next for you?
Well, in the meanwhile, I have all of these lessons. I'm going to call them life lessons. But also when I was 17, I had a son. But, moving on, I'm trying my best to help out with him. But I'm not the greatest dad because I don't know who I am at the time. And, I'm trying to figure it out. So he's gone now and I'm working. And, it just comes to a certain point where I just have to wrap my brain around the fact that I need to go back to school and I need to make something of my life. Other words, I'm going to get myself in trouble because while I'm at home and he's locked up, I start to get into this little comfort zone, go to work, come home, go get something to drink, go shoot some ball, go to sleep, do it all over the next day. I get into this little rhythm that's not very productive because it was leading nowhere. And so, it got to a certain point, an incident here and an incident there. And I decided I'm going to go to A&T. And my mom steps up and, we had another incident at the house. We had another drug-related incident at the house, same house that I grew up in, same one that I saw the first raid and the third grade. There was another raid at the house and, that's a different story. But at that point, the U.S. Marshals take our house and I'm actually visiting my aunt who was an attorney in West Virginia when this particular raid takes place. And it's like I had to get out of Walnut Cove, I guess, and my mom told me I have to go. So I enrolled at A&T part-time as a student.
And for those who don't know, that's North Carolina A&T University, which is that's in Greensboro, right?
Yes, in Greensboro. And, I end up making the baseball team. And then I end up finding a pretty good groove as far as becoming a teacher, becoming a motivator, becoming an influence, because that's what I've seen as I start to develop over the course of my early 20s. I'm starting to see that there are so many people who saved me during the course of my, my life. And, so many different people stepped in to motivate me and encourage me. Family members, people who lived around the corner from me, my mom, all those teachers who I mentioned previously. There were so many different pieces. And now I'm still going back to visit these prison camps now because dad's still locked up. I graduate with a bachelor's in education, health, physical education. I wanted to coach. I wanted to teach. I wanted to be an influencer. I wanted to impact lives of kids who maybe had struggles such as I did, because I was an expert in that field. And I figured if I could catch a kid who needed some help because his home life was a lot different from others, or because his values don't match up with that of a regular middle class individual who, in most cases would be a teacher, and they don't understand him, that became my drive. And so I graduated in 95 from A&T and began my teaching career.
The lessons that you learned growing up, you had a pretty tough childhood. You've overcome a lot. And so how is that? How have you taken that to turn that into the person you are today?
Well, you really have to understand people, and it comes down to relationships. And, that's what we do with Drive. Figure you can't create a relationship without communicating with someone, without understanding what their reference is. And, growing up with my dad, I had a different reference than most third, fourth, fifth graders because of what I'd seen. So if you didn't understand my reference or what I'd seen in my life, there's no way you could understand me as a person, because my reference, those are my experiences. And, this is another science coming from Dr. William Powers. We have to understand references by creating relationships. My dad, I learned so much from him. And in some situations, I learned what not to do. In many situations, in other situations, I learned some pretty cool things because he would challenge me. And, he wasn't a bad person once again, but he still created a certain reference that's not the norm for most kids. And now I understand, being able to work with principals and work with leadership teams and staff, helping them to understand they have to seek the reference of their students and of their colleagues if they're going to have an impact on a child's life. And that's what it's all about. Because you save one, man, that's great. If you can just save one.
You are in a unique position based on your background to do what you do today.
My motivator, and that started probably, when I decided to go back to school at A&T. And I said I want to impact lives. My goals began to expand from that point, because at one point I wanted to impact lives from the perspective of a coach, because I know how young men, especially, how they respond to their coaches. But it began to grow. And then all of a sudden I was trying to make an impact on schools as a principal. And now I get to impact principals and teachers on a grander level. So if I can reach those principals and reach those, those leadership teams and those staff members and help them to understand how to build those relationships, understand the behaviors and, the human behavior and why things are occurring the way they are, I'm really hitting it at a larger level. And the more schools that we can reach, the more students it will impact. This thing is spreading, and it's a huge opportunity for me to share my experiences and also to be understanding of other experiences. And, and also from the perspective of those teachers who impacted me. It doesn't feel like work because it's turned into a passion. And that started in my early to mid 20s when I say, if I'm not going to be a pro baseball player, I will impact some lives somewhere. And some of those lives I'm impacting are right here in my house. I have 4 boys and I have to take care of them while they're here. I have a couple of grandboys. I'm going to get more time with them later on, I hope. And, just impacting those immediates and making sure they're in a good place to be successful in life.
And Derrick, I want to give you the last word on this. What would you tell people, especially maybe some kids that are teenagers, young adults that they've had a tough background, had it tough growing up? What advice would you give them?
You can make it, but you have to be able to trust other individuals. You have to find those you can trust. You need that support. And then you surround yourself by those people who are positive, who will support you in the right way. And then you have to set your goals to do something productive with your life. It doesn't have to be a professional athlete. And that's something we kind of get pigeonholed into, sometimes as young men to, become a pro, or to become an entertainer. It doesn't have to be that way, but you need to set your goals to do something productive with your life. And it could be military, it could be working, as a manager somewhere at a store, or it could be going to college. And, so you have to expose yourself to other things outside of what you may grow up with in your small town or your city or you're in the Bronx, wherever you are. Expand your reference and understand that, things are different throughout the world. You just have to find out what you do well and then focus on that.
Well, Derrick, thanks so much for coming on. If anyone wants to find out more about you and about Drive Revolution, how can they find out about you guys?
We're ready. We have a great team. And if you go to, of course, www.thedriverevolution.com, if you drop a message in there or even go to the site and make a phone call, you can schedule us to come out and we can set up a consulting coaching session. We can come by and visit your school, or you can just basically see what services we have to offer, because we really have, all of our coaches have a passion for what we do. And that's to impact schools, to impact lives, to build those relationships and change cultures. And so if you go to that site, again, www.thedriverevolution.com, you can catch up with us and we'll be glad to come by and visit with you.
Derrick, like I said, man, I'm so glad you came on. Your story is it's a true success story. I think people are going to get a lot from this story. Great lessons in here, and just keep doing what you're doing. Working with these kids, working with these schools to make these kids better. You're doing a great thing.
Thanks for having me, Rod. And when you come down, make sure you come see me so we can go grab us a bite and hang out in Atlanta.
We'll do it. Thanks a lot, Derrick. Derrick Dalton was an amazing guest. What a story. Growing up with your father in and out of prison, but thriving with support of friends, teachers, and coaches, and then using what he went through to choose a career in education to help kids who are going through tough times that may not be apparent. So episode 5 of Rocket Motivation is in the books. Next week's guest is one of my greatest friends, Larry Hartle. Larry had a dream job working on a pit crew in NASCAR. The job ended well before Larry wanted to because of an injury. His story is about moving forward in life and providing for his family. I know you're going to like next week's story. Thanks for listening to the show. If you're interested in getting my book, Get Back Up, just go to Amazon and put in Get Back Up and my name, Rod Caden. It'll pop right up. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. I would really appreciate it if you'd share it with a friend. I would like as many people to hear my message as possible. And we'll see you next week. Never give up and always get back up.